Why are you laughing?
You missed something.
The Sarathi conquest of Earth had taken 11 days. Commander Veshtar remembered thinking as he watched the last organized military resistance collapse outside what the humans called Buenos Aires, that this species had been almost disappointingly easy. The Sarathi War Council had allocated 4 months for the campaign. They had used less than 2 weeks. Their planetary analysts had modeled 17 different scenarios. In none of them had Earth fallen this quickly. That was the first mistake, not the conquest. The assumption that falling quickly meant staying fallen. 3 months later, Veshtar sat inside the mobile command structure his engineers had anchored above what had been Chicago, staring at a report that made no sense. His supply depot in the northern sector had suffered its 4th consecutive contamination event. 17 of his soldiers stationed in the Western Agricultural Zone had developed a gastrointestinal illness that their medical staff couldn't classify. The communication relay at Grid Point 47 had developed an electromagnetic interference pattern that none of his engineers could source. The forward mapping unit in the southern residential district had reported that their geolocation systems were producing errors, consistent, precise, repeating errors, that were sending patrol units 3 streets away from their intended coordinates, every single time, without variation. Individually, each incident was minor. Together, they were costing him the occupation. He called Intelligence Officer Dreth into the command chamber. Dreth was the best analyst the Sarathi military possessed, patient, methodical, and almost irritatingly good at finding patterns in data that looked like noise. "Give me the common thread," Veshtar said. Dreth studied the compiled reports for a long moment. The incidents cluster within 1 kilometer of the designated non-combatant zones, the Elder facilities. "Yes, Commander." Veshtar was quiet. The designated non-combatant zones had been his idea. It had seemed logical, even, he privately thought, humane. When the Sarathi had begun establishing occupation infrastructure, they had identified a population segment that posed no military threat, the very old. Humans past a certain age showed declining physical capability, reduced neural processing speed, and no access to the communications or weapon systems that made younger humans dangerous. The most efficient solution had been to consolidate them, move them from scattered residences into centralized facilities in each urban sector where they could be monitored with minimal garrison resources, free up the surrounding territory, simplify the occupation grid. It had taken 2 weeks to relocate approximately 40 million elderly humans into approximately 300 consolidated facilities across the planet. Veshtar had considered it one of his cleaner administrative decisions. "You're telling me," he said carefully, "that the disruptions originate from the Elder facilities." "I'm telling you the disruptions cluster near them," Dreth said. "I cannot yet confirm causation." Veshtar stared at the map. "Send an investigator." The investigator's name was Coordinator Cell, and she was thorough. She spent 4 days inside designated non-combatant Zone 7, what had been a large community recreation center in a human city called Milwaukee, before she filed her first report. It arrived at Veshtar's command post at the 3rd hour of the night cycle, and he read it 3 times because he was not certain he understood it correctly. The facility contains approximately 412 human elders, ranging in estimated age from 68 to 91 years. The population is cooperative and presents no observable threat. They engage in activities consistent with their biological limitations, sedentary group gatherings, verbal communication, handicraft work. They cook communally, which accounts for elevated kitchen access. They sleep in shifts due to a biological irregularity common in aged humans involving disrupted nocturnal cycles. Most notable observation, they talk. Constantly. To each other and to any staff who enter the facility. They ask questions. They offer food. They appear to be in genuinely good spirits. I do not yet understand why this concerns me, but it does. Veshtar forwarded the report to Dreth without comment. Dreth's response came back in under an hour. Ask her what they talk about. Cell's next report was filed 18 hours later. It was longer. The verbal content of elder communications is difficult to categorize. They discuss what they call the old days, historical periods before the current conflict. They share what appear to be instructional narratives disguised as personal reminiscences. One elder, who the others address as Vera, spent 3 hours yesterday explaining in great detail how her grandmother had preserved food during something they called the Second World War. The method she described involved specific combinations of salt concentrations and acidity levels that, I later calculated, would render our standard ration testing sensors non-responsive to contamination indicators. I thought this was coincidental. Then a different elder, in a separate wing of the facility, spent 2 hours explaining nearly identical methods to a group of younger staff members who had asked about her recipe for what she called pickled vegetables. I do not believe this is coincidental anymore. Veshtar read that paragraph 4 times. Then he pulled up the contamination report from the Northern Supply Depot. Their testing sensors had flagged nothing. The illness had developed in his soldiers only after consumption. He had assumed a sensor malfunction. He was beginning to reconsider that assumption. He sent Cell 1 instruction. Find Vera. Vera Marchetti was 81 years old, 4 feet 11 inches tall, and weighed approximately 52 kilograms. She had white hair that she kept in a braid, a gold cross on a chain that she wore always, and glasses with a small crack in the left lens that she had repaired with what the humans called electrical tape, a gray adhesive strip that she had apparently kept in her cardigan pocket for 3 months. She was, by every Sarathi metric for threat assessment, completely harmless. She was also, Cell wrote in her third report, the most dangerous individual she had ever encountered in 17 years of intelligence work. I made the mistake of sitting down with her. She offered me something she called biscotti, which is a baked human food item, and asked me where I was from. I explained that I could not share personal information. She said that was fine. She was just curious. She found different species fascinating. She had always loved to travel, but of course things had been complicated lately. She said this without any apparent hostility. She poured me a beverage she called chamomile tea and asked if I would like to see photographs of her grandchildren. I said yes. I do not know why, and she showed me 47 photographs on a small printed paper album she kept inside her cardigan. She told me each grandchild's name and one specific story about each one. I stayed for 6 hours. She fed me twice more. I left feeling that I had made a friend. The following morning, I reviewed my notes and realized I had provided, in response to her gentle questions about my interesting work, the following information: our garrison rotation schedule, the location of 3 secondary supply caches, the name of the officer responsible for communication relay maintenance in Sector 4, and our preferred frequency range for internal coordination signals. I had volunteered all of this. She had not asked directly for any of it. She had simply been warm and interested and patient, and I had talked. I have been interviewing intelligence targets for 17 years. I have never been successfully socially engineered by anyone, let alone a 4'11" woman who offered me biscuits. I am attaching, as a secondary document, my best attempt to reconstruct what I told her. I would estimate it represents a meaningful intelligence breach. Veshtar called Dreth immediately. She's running assets, he said. Dreth was quiet for a moment. In a non-combatant zone, with no communications access, none that we gave her. Another silence. You think they're passing information person to person. I think, Veshtar said slowly, that I put 40 million of their most experienced social operators into 300 interconnected facilities, gave them unlimited time to talk to each other, and then sent my personnel in to conduct welfare checks without a single briefing on counterintelligence protocol. He paused. I built them the network, I handed them the infrastructure, and then I set my people in to be interviewed. Dreth said nothing for a moment. When he spoke, his voice carried something Veshtar had never heard from him before, a note of genuine, reluctant admiration. The geolocation errors. The relay interference. What do the engineers know about human handicrafts? Veshtar asked. A pause. Minimal. Find out what the elders in Facility 4 were knitting 3 weeks before the relay in Grid 47 started malfunctioning. He closed the connection. The answer, when it came back, was wire, not knitting. The elder women in Facility 4 had been, for 2 weeks before the relay interference began, engaged in what appeared to be traditional textile work using repurposed material from a maintenance supply cart that had been left unattended for 40 minutes. what they had actually been producing, painstakingly concealed inside a decorative wall hanging that their guards had admired and even photographed to send home, was a series of small conductive loops sized precisely to the resonant frequency of the Sarathi communication relay in grid sector 47. The physics involved were not complicated. Veshtar's engineers confirmed it in under an hour once they knew what to look for. The execution, however, required knowing the exact frequency range, the exact distance, and the geometry of the relay's antenna array. Information that Coordinator Cell had provided to Vera Marchetti during a pleasant 6-hour conversation over biscotti and chamomile tea. Information that Vera had passed through a chain of visitors, through carefully worded letters that appeared to be personal correspondence about family recipes, through the facility's permitted interwing social activities, across 14 facilities, covering 400 kilometers in 11 days. Veshtar sat with this for a long time. The supply contamination was the same principle. The illness in the Western Agricultural Zone was the same. The geolocation errors, those had required something more sophisticated, a deliberate and systematic reporting of incorrect landmarks to the mapping units over several weeks, coordinated across multiple facilities, time to produce compound errors in the navigational model the patrol units relied on. He pulled up the patrol error data. The misdirections weren't random, they were precise. They routed patrol units away from 3 specific streets in the southern residential district, streets that, when he overlaid the mapping data, created a corridor. A clear, unpatrolled corridor running from the southern distribution hub to the edge of the non-combatant zone. Someone had been moving supplies through it. He called Dreth again. "Tell me about the human concept of a grandmother." Dreth blinked. "Commander. Culturally, functionally. What is the role of the elder female in human social structure?" Dreth took a moment. "They occupy a knowledge retention function. In pre-industrial human societies, elder women were primary repositories of medicinal knowledge, food preservation, social protocol, and inter-community relationship management. They train younger members of the community in crisis response, resource management, and long-duration planning. In many cultures, they also functioned as communication hubs, the individuals who maintained contact between dispersed family units and thus between dispersed social networks." He paused. The Sarathi assessment categorized them as low threat based on physical capability metrics. "We assess them the way we would assess aging soldiers," Veshtar said. "Yes, they were never soldiers. No, they were logistics officers, intelligence assets, network nodes." He rubbed the ridge above his eye. "We removed them from their dispersed positions, consolidated their network into a dense interconnected cluster, and protected the cluster with our own garrison. We didn't neutralize their threat, we concentrated it." Dreth was quiet for a moment. "Should I prepare a dispersal order?" "Separate the facilities, reduce inter-wing communication. It's too late for that." Veshtar looked at the map again, the 300 glowing points that marked his designated non-combatant zones, scattered across every major human population center on the planet. "The network is already built. Dispersing the individuals won't dismantle it. They'll have contingencies." He thought of the wall hanging, the concealed wire loops, the recipe letters. They've been building contingencies since before we arrived. This was not improvised. He was beginning to understand something that had not appeared in any of the Sarathi models of Earth, something about how information traveled in human societies, not through systems or institutions which could be captured or destroyed, through people, through relationships, through 40 years of knowing your neighbor and her neighbor and the woman 3 villages over whose grandmother had known your grandmother, and all of them knowing things, practical, terrible, useful things that had been whispered down through generations like a long, patient preparation for exactly this. He had studied human warfare. He had not studied human memory. Sal requested a second meeting with Vera Marchetti. This time, she went in with full awareness of what she was walking into. It did not help as much as she expected. Vera was in the common room when Sel arrived, playing what the humans called cards with 3 other elders. She looked up, smiled, and said, "Oh, how lovely, sit down, I'll get you some tea." Sel sat. Tea appeared. Biscotti appeared. 2 of the other card players drifted away. The third, an elderly man named Bogdan, who claimed to be 93 and might have been telling the truth, remained and said almost nothing but watched Cell with a steady, mild attention that she found deeply uncomfortable. "I've been asked to speak with you directly," Cell said, "about the coordination activities." Vera looked at her over her glasses. "Coordination activities. We know about the relay, the supply contamination, the patrol misdirections." "Do you?" Vera said. "Not a question." She took a sip of her tea. "We know the information passed through this facility." Vera set down her cup. She looked at Cell for a moment with an expression that Cell had no category for. Warm and tired, and something that was not quite amusement but was adjacent to it. "You know," she said, "my grandmother survived 2 occupations. She was in Warsaw during the war. The first one, the Germans, then after. She was 17 the first time." She folded her hands on the table. "She used to tell me, the occupiers always think the danger is the young men with guns, because that's what they'd be if they were doing the occupying. They never think about who's feeding those young men, who's healing them, who's teaching them which streets are safe and who to trust and how to move without being seen." She smiled at Cell. It was a genuine smile. "My grandmother was 61 when she helped get the last of them out. Nobody ever asked her a single question." Cell said, "We're asking you now." "Yes," Vera agreed pleasantly, "but you've already lost the relay and the supply route. And I think—" She tilted her head slightly. "You found the wall hanging about 3 days ago, which means you've probably changed your communication frequency, which means the group in Facility 11 has about 6 more days before they finish the adjustment." She looked at Cell with the same mild, interested expression she had worn when asking about her grandchildren. "Would you like more biscotti? You look tired." Cell stared at her. "The thing people don't understand about old women," Vera continued, refilling Cell's cup without asking, "is that we have been watching how things work for 60, 70, 80 years. We've watched governments fall. We've watched economies collapse. We watched your people come down from the sky, and we thought, we have seen this before. Not this exactly, but the shape of it." She set down the teapot. "When you moved us all here into these facilities, I understand what you were thinking. You were thinking, group them. Watch them, they're harmless. But what you actually did was put every woman who'd survived something in the same building." She paused. "There are 400 of us in this facility alone. Between us, we have lived through 11 wars, 4 famines, 6 regime changes, 2 pandemics, and a financial collapse. We have forgotten more about surviving occupation than your analysts have ever had occasion to learn." Cell said, very quietly, "How far does the network go?" Vera considered this. Then she said, "Do you have children?" That isn't, I'm asking because," Vera said gently. "If you have children and you want them to be safe, there is a conversation that could be had between your commander and some people I know. People who are tired and old and would very much like to stop doing this." She met Cell's eyes. "The network goes to every facility on the planet. It has been operational for 9 weeks. In 6 weeks, if that conversation hasn't happened, there will be an event that your commander will find difficult to explain to his superiors." She picked up her cards. More biscotti. Veshtar received Cell's report at the 4th hour of the morning cycle. He read it without moving for a long time. Then he pulled up the planetary facility map again. 300 points of light. He had put them there himself, neat and organized and carefully managed, and he had felt efficient doing it. He had built the most effective resistance network in the history of the Sarathi expansion, and he had done it himself in 2 weeks, and they had let him. He thought about what Vera had said. "We have seen this before. Not this exactly, but the shape of it." He thought about his grandmother, the Sarathi equivalent, the elder females of his own species who had guided young warriors in the old traditions. He had not thought about them in this context. He was beginning to think he should have. He called his war council at dawn. "I need a full assessment," he said, "of what the elder population knows that we don't. Not what they can do physically, what they know. Preservation methods, chemistry, navigation, communication, social manipulation, medical knowledge, engineering improvisation." He paused. "Everything your intake assessment scored as 0 threat, I want rescored." The council was quiet. The Sarathi expansion has conquered 49 planets, Veshtar said. We have never encountered a species that maintained functional knowledge transmission across non-institutional social networks at this scale. We modeled their soldiers. We modeled their technology. We modeled their young. He looked at the map. We did not model what happens when a species spends 10,000 years making sure that every generation of children sits with their grandparents and learns, in the form of stories and recipes and old habits, exactly how to endure the worst thing that has ever happened to them. He turned away from the map. We should have. The council began to speak. He let them talk. He was thinking about a 4'11" woman with a cracked lens in her glasses who had outlasted 2 generations of her own planet's occupations before his species arrived, and who had looked at Coordinator Celeb, one of the finest intelligence officers in the Sarathi military, and said, "You look tired, have some biscotti," and then taken everything she needed. He was thinking about the wall hanging. The wire loops, hidden in the textile pattern, sized precisely to the resonant frequency of his communication relay. He was thinking about a 17-year-old girl in Warsaw whose knowledge had traveled 70 years and 3 generations to end up in the hands of a woman who would use it against an alien occupation that the original girl could never have imagined. He was thinking about how long humans had been doing this, how many times, how it must have become over millennia of catastrophes survived and knowledge passed down and grandchildren taught in quiet kitchens and on long winter evenings, a reflex, automatic, the way that when something terrible arrived, the old women of the species began, without being asked and without coordinating on any frequency anyone could intercept, simply doing what they had always done, remembering, and teaching, and waiting. The negotiation took 11 days, exactly as long, Cell noted in her private log, as the original conquest. Vera Marchetti attended every session. She did not speak much. She sat at the end of the table, drank her tea, and occasionally asked clarifying questions that turned out, on reflection, to be far less innocent than they appeared. The Sarathi delegation came to treat her silences as more significant than anyone else's statements. The agreement that emerged was complicated, partial, and probably temporary. Veshtar had no illusions about that, but it was an agreement which was more than he had expected 3 months ago. On the last day, he asked to speak with her privately. She agreed, and they sat in the same common room where Cell had met her, at the same table, and she made him tea. He did not think she was trying to social engineer him. He thought she was simply being herself, which had turned out to be functionally identical. "The event you mentioned," he said, "the one in 6 weeks." Vera looked at him mildly. "Was there actually an event?" She smiled. It was a small smile, warm and entirely opaque. "There was always going to be something," she said. "There always is." She sipped her tea. "But I'll tell you this much, because I think you're a reasonable man and I'm very tired. If there had been a specific event planned, it probably would have involved the water treatment systems and a compound that women in this part of the world have been fermenting in their kitchens for